Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Can We Keep Up podcast, where we unpack how U.S. diplomats are responding to China's increased influence in Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2013, China launched its Belt and Road Initiative, a multi-trillion-dollar global infrastructure and economic development strategy. This episode will be focusing on Venezuela, Latin America's top purchaser of Chinese military hardware, in order to understand the security risks associated with Chinese presence in the region and how U.S. diplomacy can address our concerns. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ambassador James Story. Ambassador James Story is a career Foreign Service officer who dedicated a large part of his nearly 30-year career to Latin America, filling senior leadership positions in Colombia and Brazil before subsequently serving as charge and ambassador to Venezuela between 2018 and 2023. He also served as head of the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs for the Western Hemisphere. Thanks for joining us today, Ambassador Story.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Amanda. Thanks for having me.
All right, could you start us off by giving us a little insight into your experience serving as ambassador to Venezuela, especially since you were physically working out of Bogota, Colombia? What were your primary concerns at the time?
Right. As sui generis it may appear, this has happened in several other countries and I had the opportunity to discuss the situation, for instance, of Libya, the Libya External Office. We had the U.S. Embassy to Somalia operating from Kenya for a period of time. So this has happened in other places, and we had the opportunity to discuss with them how to go about building a mission inside of a mission to one country that is responsible to a mission to another country. So I was able to really lean on the experiences that other people had to create our embassy within an embassy. Devoted to a country where we were not present. It was difficult, right? I mean, we not with the other ambassador, in my case, ambassador to Colombia. That part we managed to work out, although you can imagine there were some bureaucratic hurdles we had to get over, but it all worked out fine. But the difficulty certainly is in how do you remain relevant in a country where you're not present. We managed to do that very well. And some of the things that we did, we began during the pandemic when most people were operating from home. I began two projects that really maintained our influence inside of Venezuela. One was a weekly television program I put on, an internet TV program called Allo Embajador, which it kind of started out on my kitchen table and eventually morphed into something inside of a studio back at the embassy when we were able to go back to the embassy. But what that did was that enabled me to riff on current events inside of Venezuela and then open it up to Q&A from the Venezuelan population. And we received, I would say, we would generally get almost every week at least 50,000 to 100,000 viewers. Some weeks we would get 300,000 viewers. So we actually had some pretty big impact inside of Venezuela being outside of Venezuela. The other thing that I started, which I think was useful, was a weekly phone call with other chiefs of mission. It started that handled Venezuela. It started really focused on the missions in Colombia, and then we expanded to missions in Caracas as well. But to give you an idea, the Irish embassy has 3 employees, 3 diplomats, and they cover 5 countries. Certainly, one of them being Venezuela, and they were in Colombia and they couldn't go to Venezuela. So certainly our ability to engage with them and tell them what was happening was useful to the Irish government, to the ambassador of Ireland, and also useful more broadly to the European Union, which is a big player when it comes to diplomacy in Venezuela. So those are the kinds of things that we did. And then finally, I would add that given the proximity, and I think that's a key issue to Venezuela, we would regularly have people come across the border and then catch a flight from Cucuta to Bogota in order to meet. So we maintained, I would say, some of the best situational awareness on the ground in Venezuela without actually being there.
Wow, okay, thank you. The current administration is operating under an America First policy. Could you explain to listeners and viewers to what extent ambassadors must reflect U.S. policy while abroad?
Well, it's interesting. This is more of a branding exercise than anything else. I can't imagine any other administration it hasn't been America First. Every
Right.
administration has been America First. There is no ambassador in the field that hasn't been America first. There's no deep state that believes America is second or third or fourth or fifth or what have you. America is always first. American diplomats abroad, our job is to represent the United States abroad, and to be the liaison between that country, the United States really in that country, right? What we do, we gather information, we do analysis, we make friendships, we have colleagues, and we understand a country politically and economically and socially to such depth that we can then report that back to decision makers in the United States where they make decisions. And so I would say that ambassadors abroad under this administration or under any administration, especially when you're ambassador, you're the personal representative of the of the president. So being the president's personal representative means that you're going to own the policy, and you're going to be very clear and get your directions on how on how that policy is articulated. Now, what I can say, the difference that I saw is my last job was acting chief of mission in Angola. Some of the differences I've seen is kind of the concerns from the White House and from leadership and State Department that their ambassadors were not doing that which they were instructed, which I can assure you was not the case. We always did what we were instructed. Even when instructed to do things with which we would not agree, you do that which you're instructed. For instance, I personally don't believe that we should vote against Ukraine in the United Nations. If we're asked to say to the other government, we need you to vote against the Ukraine in the United Nations, then that's something that we would deliver that message as requested. So I would say the difference now is there appears to be this belief, unfortunately, that ambassadors abroad are not, you know, actively, vociferously acting upon instructions from Washington, which is just not the case. The U.S. Department of State has always been America first. It will always be America first, regardless of who is president.
And I guess to kind of bring it back to Venezuela, what were your primary concerns as ambassador there at the time?
Well, it's interesting. One of the biggest concerns we had was a humanitarian crisis that had been unfolding in the country for some time. When Maduro became president unexpectedly, he himself did not expect to be president in 2013 upon the demise of Hugo Chavez. Um, he unfortunately became president at the same time that the commodity supercycle came to an end, and the value of oil that had been as high as $130 a barrel during some of Chavez's time went down to $30 or $40 a barrel, which was under the cost of production. So suddenly, a country which was built around during the Chavez years, especially built around graft and corruption and mismanagement and your ability to seek rents. When there was plenty of money to do that, it wasn't a problem. Suddenly, there wasn't enough money to do that, yet they continued to act as if there were, or if there was enough. We saw was a contraction of the GDP by 85%. This all happened before U.S. sanctions hit their economy, which really happened against the oil sector and the government, gold, Colombiasa, and other issues in early 2019. But what we assessed with USAID, what we assessed with international organizations was that there was a humanitarian crisis unfolding in Venezuela. And that humanitarian crisis was not resolved on January the 3rd when Maduro and his wife Celia Flores were spirited out of the country into U.S. custody. That humanitarian crisis continues today and has now been exacerbated by the twin earthquakes, which devastated a country that was just barely getting on a path towards something. That something is now all the way back to phase one, you know, this idea of stability and then economic recovery and then democratic transition. The democratic transition piece was just very nascent, but now we're back to phase one stability. But we should have never taken our eye off the ball of the humanitarian crisis itself. That humanitarian crisis resulted in the departure of over 8 million Venezuelans making a desperate journey anywhere. 3 million are in Colombia, a million are in Peru, 600,000, perhaps more, made it to the United States, all of them seeking better opportunity, economic opportunity, and certainly political opening and their ability to kind of live freely under universal rights that we all enjoy. So for me, my concern at the time was how do we make sure that we get food to the people who need it? What are the mechanisms by which we can do this? How do we get medicine in the country? There was just nothing. This earthquake has really laid bare the fact of the beggaring of a nation by this dictatorship, where the money that was supposed to go to hospitals was stolen, the medicine that was supposed to go to hospitals was resold, other words, stolen, and that they have zero capacity to help people. My hope is that the United States will put a focus on the humanitarian side of the ledger rather than just extractive such as oil and gas and mining.
Today's episode is obviously talking about China and Venezuela. The two countries signed a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2013. Could you kind of define what that means for us?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these partnerships, and some of them are, joining the Belt and Road or comprehensive partnership and highest level of engagement. These are paper exercises more than really anything. But I think it's important for your viewership or listenership, whatever you call a podcast, to take into account the fact that China is the largest trading partner with the vast majority of Latin America.
Mhm.
Mexico is the United States. They're our largest trading partner and vice versa. But if you look at, let's just take a country such as Chile, 42% of their exports go to China. So these are relationships that have been built over a period of time since China was kind of brought into the international system around 2000 or so.
Mhm.
Um, and the United States simply hasn't competed. We don't compete when it comes to large scale construction projects. We don't do build kind of these build, operate, own, operate, transfer, boot projects. We don't do big infrastructure projects. We don't build airports and dams and stadiums abroad. We don't do those kinds of things. So we're not competing. We don't have our own 5G network that we can compete with Huawei, however you pronounce it. But the fact of the matter is, China has come in and they basically say, okay, well, we'll give you some money and then we want to have access to resources, which is what happened in Venezuela. But what I can say is that even the Chinese who used kind of debt diplomacy for a period of time, now they're using more, the state in China has less money to throw around, so they're using more business opportunities to try to get more business deals, B2B type things, which of course has the backing of the PRC, but still. But what I can say is that I have watched very carefully as Nicolas Maduro attempted to get money from China in 2018, and then at a latter point, I think their total debt stack at one point was something like 60 billion, and they were being paid off with discounted barrels of oil, and those discounts became very high. Especially after 2019, when we put sanctions on the oil sector in Venezuela. Basically, rogue ships were laundering Venezuelan crude through Malaysia and then on to China. You can look at Malaysian exports of sour or heavy crude, and they absolutely skyrocket. And they're not producing it; they're just transporting it from Venezuela through all kinds of crazy mechanisms. But Maduro went to try to get more money out of the Chinese, but they recognized that this was a bad bet. The money had been stolen. The money was stolen for housing projects for the poor. The money was stolen for transportation corridors, such as the train that was supposed to go to Aragua, which led to this foreign terrorist organization or or narcotics trafficking organization, whatever we want to call it, the Tren de Aragua. Um, so this transnational criminal organizations, if you will. So the money had been stolen. And what Maduro and company started to do was pay back the Russians for the military hardware before paying back the Chinese. I don't know exactly how much is owed to China today, but it's a significant sum of the total $240 billion that Centerview just came out and said is a debt stack for Venezuela. Now imagine, sorry, you didn't ask this question, but I have to add here, and I've had my coffee this morning, so I'm talking fast. Look, you've got a country that lost 85% of its GDP, was slowly coming out of a hole. The debt of 240 billion is higher than what they believe to be at 170. Some of that is sovereign debt, some of that is debt to companies that were expropriated, some of it is other types of debt, bonds, and things of that nature. Um, Now we just had this terrible, tragic incident that is going to probably have a negative 7% GDP hit to the country. When they have to borrow money to rebuild, they're increasing that debt stack and they don't really have a path forward to increase oil and gas revenues to help them pay off the bills. If you look at how much revenue comes in and how much debt is owed, it would take quite some time before, I mean, we'll be in the next ice age before they can pay this thing off. So they're going to have to really focus in and do a reconstruction of the debt. But now the total focus, as it should be, is on the terrible earthquakes.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And when you look into China and Venezuela's relationship, Venezuela's purchasing of Chinese military hardware sounds kind of alarming to the average American. China built two ground stations in Venezuela that Beijing is allegedly able to access remotely. So my natural question as an American is, should we be alarmed? And my more specific question to you is, what do you believe is China's goal with this type of trade? And what does China's rising influence over security in Latin America as a whole mean for the US?
So in the case of Venezuela, these ground stations that connect to satellites, they're doing that as well in Argentina and Chile.
Mhm.
I think they did one in Peru, if I'm not mistaken, also. The concern there is that they can use this to track satellites and they can also use it for ballistic missile technology. Other than that, the purchase, if you will, from China with military hardware has been focused on the censorship apparatus and the fatherland card that allows them to use social control mechanisms for who gets subsidized food, who can get a passport, the kinds of things that do in China regularly. You know, if you in China, they know who you are, they have your picture, they're
Right.
using all those mechanisms by which they can control the populace. That's the part that concerns me about Venezuela. It's actually the offensive capability that the Venezuelans have gotten from Russia and from Iran are more concerning to me. From Russia, the Sukhois are in a class by themselves in the region as far as fighter bomber aircraft go. There's no response for those aircraft from Colombia, for instance. There's just no capability to go up against the F-16s and the Sukhois that they have. The other is they have 5,000 man pads or man portable or person portable anti-aircraft missiles. Those concern me because if they fall into the wrong hands, they also have other types of missiles that they purchased from or obtained from Russia. From the Iranians, they got two things which are destabilizing. One, um, these missile boats, which we had kept them out of Venezuela for a period of time, but they've got in there. And these are kind of boats that are fast boats that have missiles on them. That's destabilizing, especially because of the problems with the Guyana and the Essequibo region and their obvious territorial dispute. The Iranians provided them with armed drones. They're the only country in the Americas outside the United States, perhaps Canada, that have the ability to have armed drones. So those are the things that concern me much more than China's ground-based stations. But certainly, what China would like to have is a blue water navy, which they are trying to build right now. They would like to have the ability uh, to let's say coal, if you will, a coaling station, right? But they don't. Nobody uses coal anymore. But
Right.
they want the ability to call to port in different places. So the concern that we have more broadly with China, or which of these facilities, such as the port in Callao and others, are being built by the Chinese and one in the Bahamas, are dual use. They could be used both for commercial, economic reasons and also for military reasons. I think that's why the Trump administration has put such a focus on the Panama Canal because it's a natural choke point to the
Mhm.
region.
Okay, thank you. And, now that we've covered kind of the risks and primary concerns associated with this growing relationship between Venezuela and China, I'd like to end in a slightly more positive note. Could you explain how diplomacy could be used as a tool to reconnect with Venezuela and kind of what form of diplomacy would you see to be best fit?
Well, this is a very interesting question because we've kind of gone back 100 years to gunboat diplomacy. In other words, Delcy Rodriguez and company will do what we want them to do because they recognize our capability to go in and make changes on the fly. Um, I don't think that fundamentally that kind of diplomacy builds long-term stable relationships and friendships because as soon as you no longer have the capability
Mhm.
or that you're no longer willing to use that capability, you haven't built kind of a foundational relationship. Look, I know John Barrett, who's a charge d'affaires in Caracas. I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's an outstanding diplomat who's operating under extraordinary circumstances where, his room to maneuver is pretty limited. He gets his directions from Washington. He follows his directions, as we all do. Um, but his ability to come up with new and novel ideas, such as the ones I indicated earlier, my weekly television program, or creating a call with the other missions, I think is much more difficult. Um, what I would suggest that is as terrible as the tragedy is of the earthquakes, it presents an opportunity. I hate to put it that way, but the opportunity is us working together as a region. That which happens in Venezuela has an impact well beyond the borders of Venezuela. I mentioned earlier the 8.5 million Venezuelans who have fled. They have a direct social and economic and political impact on countries across the region. Were Venezuela to be a viable, democratic, economically growing country rather than a source for foreign terrorist organizations, a safe haven for the FARC and ELN, a place in which non-state armed actors it can operate with impunity, it would go a long way to regional stability. We all have a role to play in that. Regardless of how you feel about the election in Colombia, everybody has their opinion. Should it have been Cepeda, or they supported Abelardo de la Espriella? I think we're going to have a partner that we can work with in Abelardo when it comes to security situation inside of Venezuela. We really couldn't work with the Petro government. And I think this is an important fact where the United States cannot do things unilaterally in Venezuela. We need the support, in particular of Colombia, and to a lesser extent of Brazil. In the case of Colombia, I think we'll get it. In the case of Brazil, probably not as much, depending on the outcome of the next election. But I kind of have the next election going back to President Lula for an unprecedented fourth term. But we can work with President Lula, certainly. I think we'll work more closely with the Colombians, and that's what's needed. I mean, when I served in Afghanistan, I would watch the Haqqani network and the Taliban go back and forth into Pakistan, where they were protected. The same thing happens between Colombia and Venezuela. The FARC and the ELN moved operations to Venezuela when they were facing difficulties from the Colombian government. They started coming back in under President Petro, so they're back and forth. You can't squeeze a balloon on one side and not expect to expand on the other. You have to do it on both sides at the same time. So again, I think for the security footprint, we need Colombia desperately to work with us. And then more broadly, economically and politically, we need to work with the region to get Venezuela to where it's a country that's on a democratic path. It's economically stable. It's receiving back its population that had to leave under very dire circumstances. And we can't do that by ourselves. So for me, multilateral diplomacy has a place in the world. The United States has benefited enormously from all of the institutions created at the end of World War II to create a world in which people live longer, healthier, happier lives. That system, which appears to be under attack, if you will, but that system led to unprecedented economic growth in the United States. It led to the economic boom of the Americas. And if we're going to deal with a really difficult situation when it comes to Venezuela, or potentially even with Cuba, we should be working on this to the extent practicable as a region, not just as a sole country.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today.
No, it was a real pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me on today, and I look forward to engaging the American Academy of Diplomacy moving forward, as always.